I'm greatly honored to be given this opportunity to talk about what I'm going to talk about now. Now, before, as a prelude, going into this particular presentation, the Quran states at a point, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ. Now, they ask you concerning the Ruh. Say, Ruh is from the command of God, and whatever knowledge you have been given is very little. Now, I feel that that knowledge that is very little is not the knowledge of the Ruh, but knowledge in its entirety is very, very little. And there is a reason for us being given very little knowledge, because that is how we are supposed to experience this phase of life. Now, we find these struggles within our minds that, on the one hand, something that we hold sacred, like the Book of God, says something very clearly. And on the other hand, of course, we are rational beings and we philosophize. And when a rational person comes with a rational argument, it can be very disturbing because we say, well, the Quran is saying this, and your argument is saying this. Now, how do we reconcile between the two? We can't ignore reason. So, what do? We give reason preference over scripture. And we say, well, the scripture can be interpreted because there is leverage, there are layers of meanings that scripture has. So if this makes sense rationally, then the scripture must mean what we are understanding it to mean within this rational framework. Now, that can be extremely limiting because if we can just say, what if the scriptures are accurate at face value? And what if our rational analysis has missed out a component which can then give us a broader perspective? So, for example, I remember reading these arguments of Ibn Sina and Mullah Sadra, and I'm extremely comforted by the knowledge that we've got two experts at Mullah Sadra and Ibn Sina. So, wherever I go wrong, they will put me right. And I request you to put me right. Yes, I don't want to misquote them. So, Ibn Sina was saying that the distinction between entities is by the fullness of their essence. Now, Mullah Sadra would say it's only because Ibn Sina could not conceive of existence as a fluid reality through which things are united and through which things are differentiated. So Ibn Sina came out with a perfectly rational argument. Mullah Sadr, on the other hand, said, well, that's a rational argument for sure. But in your argument, you have missed incorporating a further component. Your process of elimination of possibilities has not been accurate. Similarly, Sadra himself, in his epistemology, says, well, the form cannot leave the matter due to the unitive nature of form and matter. We cannot go out and reach the form because we know we can't go out of ourselves. So we have to intuit knowledge, basically. It has to come from somewhere else. And like form that shapes matter, the knowledge shapes itself within the high law substance of the mind, for example. So here we can ask Sadra that no, due to maybe the best of your ability, you were able to conceive that, the way you understood the infallibility of knowledge through the unity of the knower and the known, but that is only because other options were not available to you to think through at that point, for example. So such is the nature of rational arguments at many times, that we think through certain components that are known to us. Later generations find other components that can be integrated, and we understand things very differently. Now, just as a prelude, by the way, I wasn't introduced properly. I've just come from a very long journey. My brain is not here yet. It's last 7 days I've been talking continuously. And you know, when you talk continuously, you stop thinking, right? Your brain dies. That's my state right now. I haven't been able to revise. I haven't been able to put down the presentation. And so now, you know, I'm a quite a brilliant person who will just talk through it. I'm not trying to praise myself. I'm just trying to tell you it's going to be very, very rusty. So just bear with me. Uh, so let's see what the philosophers have said, particularly Sadra, building on Ibn Sina and Surawardi. So Sadra posits that individual souls arise through physical bodies. Well, not arise through. but are forms of physical bodies, and we'll explain that, and subsequently embark on their evolutionary journeys to eventually arrive at a state of independence from the body and union with the angelic realm. Whilst Ibn Sina and Sohrawardi absolutely discount the pre-existence of human soul, be it in their individual capacities or in the capacity of a single undifferentiated soul from where individual souls emanate. Sadra acknowledges the existence of an undifferentiated soul in the realm of the intellect or the knowledge of God based on the simplicity of the soul, and similarly does not discount the possibility for the existence of individual souls in non-material forms. However, the insistence on non-material forms leaves no room for a given soul to embark on a course for its self-actualization. This aligns Sadra with Ibn Sina in their concurrence that individuation and differentiation of souls after which they embark on a process of actualization can only be by virtue of matter. This is because soul is a form for the body or its perfection in a unitive and a mutually, well, in a unitive manner where the soul enables the body to reach its bodily perfection, and through it the soul intellects and reaches its own completion. The soul eventually loses the need for the body and becomes independent of it. I'm just going to carry on reading just a little bit more. Such an understanding of the soul discounts the possibility of metempsychosis because actualized forms through matter cannot become non-actualized, which is a requirement for their unitive nature with new matter. Similarly, it discounts the possibility of transmigration into fully formed material bodies to be resurrected in the hereafter, since the soul, through its growth process, has already become separated and independent of the body through which it has actualized. Furthermore, the idea of individuation of the soul and its emergence through matter forces Sadra to interpret scriptural texts, be they Qur'anic or utterances of the Prophet and the Imams, that talk of our pre-worldly existence in a way that conforms with his philosophical outlook. So, for example, the covenants taken from the loins of the children of Adam from their future progenies is understood as an existential state, presumably in a post-ensoulment state, not a pre-ensouled state. Similarly, the verse that would say in his Mashair, Mullah Sadra points this out, the verse that says, يوم يتذكر الإنسان وأن له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي, the day in which insan will cry out and will remember, will recall, and say, if only I had presented something for my life. Sadra would interpret this as recollection of their ugly traits, not recollection of the day that this was going to come. That is how Sadra would interpret. Now, Sadra is forced to make these interpretations based on his outlook that the soul did not exist prior to being embodied. The assumption relating to the nature of the soul by Ibn Sina, Sohrawardi, and Sadra is premised on their appreciation of the nature of ontology. It is squarely on the basis of their ontology. Whether through the understanding of the primacy of existence and its unity or otherwise, all three agree that existence is either immaterial and incorporeal, or it is corporeal and material, without there being a possibility of other interim worlds or realms with actualized souls that subsequently experience our present world. Thus, as Sadra explains, dunya means the immediate life, which is material. This is intertwined or comes after an immaterial world. And this will be succeeded by Akhirah, the world to come, which will also be immaterial. So there is this perfect binary. It's either material or immaterial. And because of this, obviously the soul is simple if it's immaterial, and it needs a body. And therefore, that is the bodily origin of the soul, and you can't think of the soul prior to the body. Now, having said that, let us look at the scriptural basis for the pre-existence of the human souls. Now, when I use the word worldly, I'm talking about earthly experience, not world as used by the philosophers to mean anything that subsists through God. So I'm not talking about worldly in that sense. I'm talking about worldly as existence on this earth. And the Quran makes a distinction between the earth and life on earth. The life on earth is known as the hayatud dunya, the immediate life or the lowly life. Whereas the earth is known in the Quran as the ard. So there's a distinction that the Quran makes, which might be very important afterwards. One of the things that needs to be made clear here is that when we talk about the scripture, we are doing it with the assumption that it is God talking in the Quran, not any other creative agency. Even though my own views are very different on this matter, but for the sake of this presentation, we will assume that the verses are spoken by God, not only ordained by God. Yeah. So I'm going to skip the whole notion of what Quran uses the word nafs as. The Quran does not give the definition of a soul, possibly basing on the distinction of its initial audience between the person within and the body outside. And that sufficed the revelation to make that distinction between the one that endures till the hereafter and the arbitrary personality that fades away with this world in terms of explaining its soteriology. Now, the pure scriptural basis, there are two types of arguments that the Quran presents. One is the literalistic reading of the verses, and the other are the rational arguments that are posed by the verses of the Quran. The first set of literalistic sort of understanding of the Quran is a weaker one, obviously, because we have conflicting verses and we offer reconciliation, and the reconciliation sometimes may not be satisfactory. But we'll go through the exact verses that the Quran is giving. So verses, I'm going to resort to several sets of verses, time permitting. Verses talking of the creation of souls prior to the embodiment of Adam. Now, the Quran, when it talks of the soul, does not assign soul with a gender as soul. Soul qua soul is genderless, according to the Quran. So, chapter of A'raf states, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ صَوَّرْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ. So, if you look at the verse, kum is the plural of the second person. Indeed, we created you. And the word creation in the Quran is used in the meaning of giving shape, giving form. Thumma sawwarnakum. The particle thumma denotes a sequence. We gave you shape, then we fashioned you. Then we said to the angels, prostrate before Adam. So this sequence in itself suggests that you were, then you were fashioned, then subsequently Adam was embodied, and Adam was made the point of prostration by the angels. Now, Tabatabai remarks, from what I remember, a long time ago I'd read it, Tabatabai remarks that maybe this is gesturing that we pre-existed the embodied state of Adam. In any case, there is another verse in Surah Nisa that says, O mankind, be conscious of your Lord who created you from a single soul, nafs, and created from it its pair, and spread from them two many men and women. So he created you from one soul. Then he created, or thereafter he created its pair, and then spread many men and women. The single soul is genderless here, from where you are all created. Then that soul is embodied. Then physical men and women are spread from them too. If we go by the method that the Prophet has suggested, Al-Quran yufassir ba'dahu ba'da, fafassir al-Quran bi ba'dihi ba'da. Interpret the Quran in its own, with its own verses. So bearing the above in mind, we turn to another set of verses that bear on the notion of pre-worldly existence of human individuals. So the verse of chapter of Ali Imran reads, and remember when God made a covenant with the prophets, saying, now that I have given you the book and wisdom, if there comes to you a messenger confirming what you have, you will indeed believe in him and you will indeed assist him. He said, God said, Do you affirm and accept the commitment? They said, we accept. So the prophets here are being addressed in their collective capacity, that I have given you the book and hukam, and if a messenger comes, and that messenger, obviously, I can assume is the archangel Gabriel or Ruhul Quds or whoever, who comes to the prophet and reminds them, and then they say, yep, we are not going to reject the task that we have taken on from God. So this verse again talks of a pre-worldly existence of the prophets. Let us look at another set of verses in line with this. كيف تكفرون بالله وكنتم أمواتا فأحياكم ثم يميتكم ثم يحييكم. How can you disbelieve in God when you were dead? He brought you to life, He will cause you to die, and He will bring you to life again. Another verse. ربنا or اللهم أمتنا اثنتين وأحييتنا اثنتين. You caused us to die twice, and you caused us to, and you brought us back to life twice. Now, somebody might argue that the first death means non-existence. But to say that you caused us to die means that they were engendered with life, and then that state of life was taken away. There's a similar verse. أَفَمَنْ كَانَ مَيِّتًا. Is he who was dead, فَأَحْيَيْنَاهُ, and we gave him life, and we gave him light, and he walks with that light within the people. The same as the one who was like him, i.e., dead, but he is in darkness. So all these verses at face value seem to suggest that there was a life prior to this. Verses talking about recollection and forgetfulness of the origin and the end. There are countless verses within the Quran asking us to remember. Of these, some without doubt are exhorting us to become mindful. Do they not see how the camel has been created? أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Here we know that God is telling us to reflect, but then there are some and ambiguously are talking to us in terms of recollection. He says to Moses and Aaron, go to the Pharaoh, in a gentle manner talk with him that he may remember, yatadakkar, or become fearful or cautious. Now, if remembrance is taken in the meaning of becoming mindful, then yakhsha means mindfulness anyway. So why would God repeat? لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرَ أَوْ يَخْشَى. Mindfulness leads to fearfulness. So the first word that's come, yatadakkara, has to mean recollect or remember. Otherwise, he becomes mindful. If he can't remember, then he becomes mindful and becomes fearful of God. Similarly, the verse which states, we have decreed death upon you all, and we are not prevented from changing your forms and raising you in ways unknown to you. Indeed, you have known the first raising. Why do you not then remember? وَنُنْشِئُكُمْ فِي مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And we can raise you in a way you don't know. Then why don't you remember? Now, somebody might say, well, it's talking about the first birth. But if somebody, oh, if you're talking about the first birth, no, I will not finish it. I'm skipping all these verses now. We're going to the rational arguments. Yeah, we're going to the rational arguments. But there are many, many verses on forgetfulness. There is another one. You have come to us the way we created you for the first time individually. You have come to us in rows the way we created you for the first time. And then the day in which the man will remember. And of what value will his remembrance be? If only I would have sent for my life to come. This is not remembrance of ugly deeds. Now, the rational arguments are formidable ones. I'm skipping several sets of verses here. These rational arguments that come from the Quran are hard to respond to. The first is God's foreknowledge and predestination. We find God expresses himself as having foreknowledge and knows what is going to happen. Now, even if we were to subscribe to Ibn Arabi's theory quite accurately, it's quite accurate theory, that the destiny of an individual human is not known. It is always in the process of unfolding. Even if we were to subscribe to this, yet the Quran says, لَقَدْ ذَرَأْنَا لِجَهَنَّمْ كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْجِنَّةِ وَالنَّاسِ لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. We have created for hell many jinn and man. For them are hearts with which they do not think. Now, if God knows of the ill fate of even one soul, and then he initiates that soul, then that God will not remain a just God. On the one hand, God says, "Inna Allah laysa bi-dhallamin lil-abid." God does not do injustice to his creatures. And on the other hand, even if one soul out of 8 billion people were to go to hell, and God knows through foreknowledge that he's going to go to hell, then for God to deliberately create him to enact his foreknowledge, for God to just rejoice and say, "See, I knew exactly what you're going to do, you're going to go to hell," that God is not worthy of being called God theologically. Gratitude to God and to the parents. The Quran countless times, Ushkurli wali walidaik. Thank me, I've created the ark for you, the sea for you, the heavens for you, the sun for you, the moon for you. I ask God a simple question. Had you not created me, would you need to have created the sun and the moon and the air and the water and the beasts? Who asked you to create me in the first place? Think about it. You create me, and then you bestow upon me, and you ask me to thank you. What sort of a God are you? You created me needy, then you supply my need, and then you ask me to thank you. So gratitude to God does not make sense by the way the philosophers are thinking. Similarly, why should we thank our parents? God conjoins thankfulness to parents with his own self in 3 or 4 verses. We can turn to our parents and say, "Look, I came into this world not as a Superman, as a little baby. You had to care for me. I couldn't take care of my own needs. You, through your selfish desires to procreate, brought me into this world, and now you're obliging me by making me thank you. You should be regarding yourselves fortunate that I don't condemn you to hell for bringing me here." Think about it, it doesn't make sense. Third argument, recording of deeds. There is a heavy emphasis in the Quran. ما لهذا الكتاب لا يغادر منه صغيرة ولا كبيرة إلا أحصاها. What be with this book? There is nothing but that it enumerates. وكرام الكاتبين. They're writing down everything. On the day of judgment, we will seal your mouth, your hands, and your feet. God, you created me, and now you're recording every deed of mine. How does that make sense? That doesn't make sense. Suffering. I have not seen a single theodicy that responds to the problem of suffering. Everything I've seen from Ibn Sina, Mullah Sadra, all of them, it's just the optimal world theodicies that are just describing how the world is. The central problem is still there. Had God not created me, I wouldn't have had this problem. Even Ibn Arabi, who says ultimately we are God, and we are the consciousness of which I agree with. Try and explain this to somebody in hell who is burning, that your higher self is rejoicing through this burning. How will that person feel who is gripped within the world of duality, God and me, or God against me? Similarly, God decrees, يَخْلُقُ اللَّهُ مَا يَشَاءُ وَيَخْتَارُ مَا كَانَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَرُ. Abu Lahab can say, "Allah, well, had you, cleaned my heart when I was a baby and caused my conception to be immaculate and helped me with Ruhul Qudus, I wouldn't be in this flaming hell right now. I would be in paradise." This arbitrariness of it all. So I'm not going, just 2 more minutes. The only way all of this can make sense is that we have existed previously. We have made a covenant with God. We have agreed to come to this world. As to why did we come here, there are two things the Quran says. One is that we have faltered previously very badly. And that's why the Prophet Muhammad is being told, "Fastaghfir lidambik." And everybody's been asked, seek forgiveness. And we are asked to acknowledge God's unity because we faltered somewhere as far as the unity of God is concerned. And two, this world is a bestowal where we are supposed to make amends. Now, one of the properties of this world is that you can't have a genuine second chance unless your memory is effaced. If we all knew where we are coming from, none of us will put a foot wrong, would we? So it has to be effaced. Finally, I just want to quickly say this, that the whole of Sadrian and Ibn Sina, their analysis is based on the immaterial and material. I don't know what material means anymore. By our understanding of quantum physics right now, we do know that we are not seeing things as they are. Our minds are processing them. So if Sadra says in the hereafter, we cannot go back into bodies, but the mind will project a body, I'm going to ask now, isn't this an imaginal world, all of it? Isn't it? Aren't we projecting it right now without knowing we are projecting it? Think about it. Sadra says, and others say as well, that the tortures of hell will be self-projected. and the delights of paradise will be self-projected. Why can't this be a projection in itself? Why can't we come back into this world and experience how to be a cat? So now, I want to say this. With the virtual reality becoming a reality, it's becoming a reality, we will say in a future world that I want my memory to be effaced and I want to experience being that character. Now, what does that do to the soul? The soul is simultaneously in two places and it's gaining through both the experiences. But the fact of the matter is that they could not at that point, and quite rightly, understand what the nature of matter was. And therefore, they had this understanding of the matter, material, and the immaterial, the temporal, and the timelessness. Maybe these distinctions were not accurate. I don't know if there is anything such as timelessness. I don't even know if there's anything as such as matter. At the core of it is are all vibrations. If a bee comes into this room, it will see a very different reality to what we are seeing. We are now finding out there is no texture, there is no smell, there is no taste, there is no touch. I'll stop there.